Hello and welcome to today's webinar. We are so glad to have you with us today. We have with us Lisa Sanford, Cindy Fisher, and Michaela Zito, who will be speaking on our webinar 2025 Meeting Influencers and Insights. I'm going to pass you over to Cindy. Cindy, take it away.
Very good. Thank you, Melissa. Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining our first meetings webinar of the year. We prepared an agenda really focused on 2025 insights and trends. And what you will notice as we go through the deck, there's a few new learnings for 2025, but as we all have experienced in the business travel and meetings industry, some things tend to move slower than others. So you'll see quite a few of the insights making progress, for example, from 2024. So we'll talk a bit about face-to-face meetings. We'll go into attendee engagement, some new technologies. We'll talk about market current pricing challenges along with contractual insights, and then some meeting agency negotiation trends. And then at the end, we'll highlight a few key takeaways. So we wanted to get a good read on what you all were expecting from the webinar. So we're going to move straight into our very first poll that really talks about the top 3 challenges in the meeting industry. If you could please click on what you're most challenged with, it'll give us some insight as we go through the webinar. All right. Well, number one, the majority of you did click lower budgets, and we've also seen that in the industry overall, followed by increasing meeting costs. So you all have an absolute balance that you have to achieve. And then third is outsourced program versus your internal outsourced program alignment with your program objectives, so in your company objectives. So that is ranking third, and then followed by meeting program alignment. So kind of at the bottom of the list is attracting meeting professional talent, which I find interesting because there were a lot of surveys where it really highlighted talent as a challenge, and then declining meeting attendance. And I do think it's what type of meetings you actually do book really determines if it's declining meeting attendance. For example, association meetings. All right, thanks everyone for participating. Very, very helpful insights. So with that, we're just going to move into a few current trends and insights overall. And if you look at 2025, and this is a culmination of some recent surveys, some of our client input, you'll notice that we have in the meeting industry high employee longevity. I don't know if this is a surprise to anyone. We have 45.2% of the meeting professionals have over 20 years in the industry. And another stat that's kind of interesting that goes with that is over 40% of the meeting professionals are over the age of 55. So one of the challenges of the industry is to attract that new young talent. Just an area for all of us to continue to focus on, which is really important. If you look at higher optimism, we in the industry have a higher optimism about the industry now versus 6 months ago. Although what's really interesting is about 5% of the individuals surveyed, it's a growing number over last year of people being more pessimistic about the industry. I think some of that has to do, quite frankly, with the challenge of cost. I mean, you all just stated that on the poll before. And then the other kind of people talent area we highlighted is you all as meeting professionals absolutely remain determined not to sacrifice your attendee experience with cost cutting. So you are really all doing a fantastic role in maintaining the integrity of your meetings and cutting costs where you need to, but yet still not sacrificing that attendee experience. I know this can absolutely be frustrating, and it is a big challenge. And then the last area in talent and people, and what everyone is sharing is supplier responsiveness is improving. I know on our end, we've experienced the same. A lot of our clients have experienced the same. It's still a challenge with the experience of the talent on the supplier side, especially when you're negotiating contracts and working with various venues. And then interesting stat, impacts and destination venue decision making. Okay, no surprise. 78.8% of you said overall cost, absolutely number one. And then number two is really meeting the organizational needs and values, which, by the way, you all highlighted on the last poll at 30.75%. And then top three factors in selecting a meeting venue. Number one is location, with over 82% saying and sharing that is absolutely number one. And that really does influence your attendee experience, right? Then it comes down to the rates. So what rate am I paying per night, for example, at a hotel? 73% of you are focused on that. And then the third is the food and beverage quality and the price of the food and beverage. Michaela's going to talk a little bit more as we get into the webinar around location and what professionals in the industry are doing with location to try to meet these higher cost demands. And then the three greatest challenges, again, highlighted by all of you in the poll, and what we've also seen is increasing costs. 89%, almost 90% are challenged with this, along with lower budgets, 49%, and then declining attendance, 31.3%. I think this stat, as I mentioned before, has a lot to do with meetings where people buy into the meeting and it's not, an incentive or a company meeting where it's being funded and paid for. But it is a challenge for many in the industry, which links back to that attendee experience. How do you make that meeting more desirable so that you can increase attendance and avoid that decline? So with that, we've got one more poll just to understand demographically who's on the call with us, and then we will dive into the meat of the webinar. All right, the majority of you on the call are meeting or event suppliers, with the second majority kind of in the other category. So you may be a meeting manager, you may be a travel manager, you may be a consultant, and then followed by meetings managers as the third bucket on the call. So we do have also kind of tied with that business travel and meeting managers. So, as we've all seen in the market, more and more roles in leadership are combining both business travel and meetings travel. And as many of you on this call probably know, in the past, we spent a lot of time talking about the value of the combined business travel and meetings. We will not focus on that today, but if we get your feedback during the chat or Q&A that you would like to see a special session on this, we'll be happy to put one together. So with that, I'm going to pause and turn it over to Lisa to start discussing face-to-face meetings and take it from there. Welcome,
Great.
Lisa.
Thank you, Cindy. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your time today. So I'm bringing the slides today to talk about the return of face-to-face meetings and events. So as things continue to settle down from post-pandemic, one of the areas that has been noticeably moving forward is face-to-face meetings. So meetings professionals agree that while all meeting formats have value, some survey results show that they really prefer the in-person meetings, and those continue to grow for 2025 and beyond. Now, virtual still has its role, and not long ago, that was the only format that we had to conduct business through the pandemic session and through coming out of pandemic. But face-to-face meetings with human interaction drive engagement and overall value to the key goals of the meeting and event. Hybrids, especially for if you have all day or multi-day meetings, have continued to decrease and have subsequently turned into in-person meetings, mainly small meetings. So talking about small meetings, the increase the small meetings now makes up about 50+% of meetings in most companies. And there still is a big gap in compliance and oversight to these meetings. So some advice would be, if you are trying to get a handle on your small meetings, that you look at putting a strategy in place for small meetings and a standard operating procedure, an SOP, that can be shared with all of the people in your organization that book small meetings. And additionally, you may want to enable some type of sourcing technology along with your small meetings guidelines or policy. And there are a lot of new technology entrants, and I'll talk a little bit about that on a next slide of technology, but there are a lot of good small meeting technologies in place that you could look at and consider, such as Planned, GroupEyes, Bizly, and Hubly, formerly known as meetingbooker.com. One of the other things with face-to-face meetings is the sustainability factors continue to rise up on the agenda. Some corporations are seeking out destinations and travel suppliers that can provide data and details on carbon emissions, what the energy usage is, and the food waste, as well as tactical ways to reduce emissions, such as recycling name tags, delivering attendee content through an app versus handing out paper program information. I was at one supplier conference where the name tag was actually recyclable, and it had built-in flower seeds, so you could go plant it in your backyard when you got home from the event. Very creative things are happening in the sustainability area. Next slide, please. So attendee engagement. So now that we know face-to-face meetings are really what are the preferred method of delivering content and through multiple different types of attendees, it's just like the corporate workforce, where there are these days multi-generational attendees attending your meetings. So you need to understand how they want to consume content, because as a baby boomer, I'm a much more about the paper and pencil and writing notes, versus a Gen Z is more about, let me take notes on my iPad or on my phone. So we recommend that when you're doing your registration, that you add a demographic information to gather the type of demographics and the attendee types that are going to be attending your meeting. Additionally, with demographics, with people working longer into life, it is very common in some industries to have up to 5 generations working in the same company. So that's a very wide spread of different ages and different interests and different ways to consume content. Sorry, I apologize for that. With the investment, you need to think about meetings differently. And you need to have like an ROI put into place. So as Cindy mentioned, with expenses being one of the #1 concerns in a meeting, need to change the mindset that instead of an expense, it's really an investment. And if you can tie that investment to an ROI, based on the different meeting types you have. So you could have an ROI for internal meetings, customer meetings, business partner meetings, etc. If you develop different ROIs or KPIs based on what you want as a goal to come out of that meeting or event, such as, does it build my pipeline for sales? Does it impact my social posts and influencers that are promoting the products or services that your company might be selling? Does it drive revenue? Or do I want to look at it by cost of attendee? So it's very important to understand your demographics and then measure the ROI to each one of those types of events. And most importantly, for attendee engagement and getting those folks to come to your meetings, which was one of the slides that Cindy talked about, is declining attendees. It's important for you to look for a way to customize your meeting and bring solutions that are both personalized and scalable. And ensure your meeting is memorable. A memorable meeting experience will bring a very good ROI if you think about how you're going to deliver your content. What is the location or venue? It doesn't necessarily always have to be a ballroom in a hotel. It can be a museum. It could be a theater. Look at engaging with social activities. So something like doing a team building where you put together bikes for a local charity, or you do cleanup at a park in the city that you have your meeting in. Also, attendees have often stated that post-survey events, surveys, that they want to have more network time. So make sure you build that into the agenda as one of the items as a part of the agenda. And then finally, utilize third-party agencies to make your event production creative. Some of the most memorable meetings that I've been to is really when I think back about the stage and the production and the AV. So those are some ideas to keep your attendees engaged and improve the meeting experience. Next slide.
Great.
So technology, we hear a lot about technology. Technology in the meeting space is changing every day. Meeting professionals have so much coming at them, but I really encourage you to embrace technology to help with your workload and allow yourself to focus on the more strategic parts of event planning. And also embrace technology to improve the attendee experience. Technology can help attendees feel more connected through the entire life cycle of an event, whether it's they're registering online for an event, they're participating in polls, as we saw earlier, we had a couple polls, or even completing that post-event survey. With applications that are new and emerging, such as virtual reality, for an example, attendees can experience content in a more engaging way and more interactive way. On the right-hand side is the percent of usage planned by planners who took the American Express Meetings and Events Global Forecast Survey. So AI is at the very top. 50% of the survey participants said they plan on using about 50% for their meetings of using AI. And there's so much AI can do, from writing content to helping with production. And so then it goes down to QR codes, live polling, wearable tech. Now, I'm not sure if you've heard about this, but it's fairly new. Wearable tech is similar to like an iWatch that your attendees would wear, and it measures the circadian rhythm. So without putting a camera in somebody's face, you can actually understand the reactions to the content they're consuming and their level of engagement through their body, heartbeat and temperature and things like that. Very cool technology coming out. Also, there is a variety of technologies that bring value to intergenerational attendees. And you want to understand what type of technology products do they want to see used in the meeting or event to help consume content. So that's just a brief touch on how technology is improving the meetings and event space, both for the planner, the meeting professional and planner, as well as meeting attendees. So now we have one, I'm sorry, no, sorry. Over to you, Cindy, for the next session with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The one thing I'll add before I turn it over to Michaela is that when Lisa was talking about the ROI in meetings and how important that is, especially in today's environment, the one recommendation, and I think most of you are doing this, but really partner with your marketing team and your brand team in your company, because they have all kinds of metrics that they've established, whether it's, social media, whether it's, brand engagement, and that way you can take advantage of those factors and those metrics and align them with your meeting to report on your meeting. There's been a lot of conversations in the industry around alignment with marketing. And with that alignment, it really can help you with that focus on cost cutting and lower meeting costs, to actually raise the bar on those to increase, so that you've got more to work with around engagement of your meetings and content of your meetings. So with that, let's go ahead and move to the next slide. And I will turn it over to Michaela to talk about the current landscape with our rising costs, our pricing, and our contracts. Michaela,
Thanks,
over to
Cindy.
you.
Thanks, Cindy. So not a surprise, we saw this in the poll that we started at the top of the call when asked what your biggest challenges are. And the number one item was lower budgets. Number two was increasing meeting costs. And this is something we're seeing with every client we're working with. And if you go to any of the industry magazines or newsletters, this is also top of mind. You'll find the majority of the publications focusing on these two items. So before we dive in too much, we just wanted to kind of set the stage with the current landscape that we're seeing in the meetings and events industry. And cost is the number one item that everyone has been discussing. So from 2019, we've just been seeing these costs steadily rise across the board. And when it comes to meetings, there are so many different components that are impacted. So the ground transportation is up 2.4%, and these are global numbers. Hotel up 2.6%. Airfare globally is up 0.6%, but if we're looking in North America only, which I'm assuming the majority of our callers here today are planning predominantly, unless it's an incentive in the US market, 4.3%. And when you put all of that together, the cost per attendee per day is up 4.3% to $169 a day per attendee. And that may not, 169, that may not seem terrible, but when you compare it to the 2021 rate of $88 a day, you can see how much of a huge jump we've had in only a handful of years, yet we're not getting any more money into our budgets to be able to accommodate for all of these rising costs. In the Amex 2025 forecast, 40% of meeting planners said that cost was their biggest challenge in 2025. We had 76% on this call today.
Yep.
One thing that we are hearing so often, and we really need to stop, is comparing things to 2019 baseline. Oh, well, why is the food and beverage so much higher? I planned a meeting pre-COVID, and this is the rate I got, or this is what my, my AV costs were. And unfortunately, 2019 can no longer be considered the baseline when we're creating and evaluating these budgets. I understand that normally the individuals creating these budgets are those that are in the meetings industry, are aware of these rising costs, and they're getting, the meeting owners or the stakeholders to approve, and there can be a little bit of a sticker shock there. So one of the items that we wanted to dive in today is how can we best manage that sticker shock and do the best we can to mitigate some of these rising costs, to put the money into that attendee engagement and really emphasize that experience, so they want to keep coming back year over year, especially for your internal meetings, because as Lisa touched on, we're still in a hybrid environment here. A lot of companies have employees working from home. It's so important that when they're having that face-to-face interaction, it's impactful and really giving back to the business. Another item we are tracking when it comes to these rising costs is how the new tariffs will impact costs further, especially food and beverage prices. We may need to get a little bit creative and offer some alternatives to that traditional coffee break to keep costs down, but something we're monitoring. I think the entire industry is, and multiple industries, obviously. So we'll be keeping an eye on that to see how that impacts coming down the line. In the same breath, we have contracting struggles. So these two components here, rising costs and issues with contracting, is really just making a great landscape for all of these planners out there. It's not an envious job for sure. So contracts, unfortunately, are far less forgiving than they were pre-COVID. And there's a handful of reasons behind this. Obviously, a lot of hotels and venues, lost a decent amount of revenue during COVID. And so they're still working on how can we recoup some of those costs, that lost revenue. There's new players on the table on both sides. So Cindy touched on that there are a lot of meeting professionals that stay in the industry, that we're lifers, right? That we are a very rare breed, and I am happy to be part of this breed. But we're seeing a lot of new people on the hospitality side, on the venue side. And so with that, you used to be able to pick up the phone and talk to your contact at the Hilton. They'd been there for 20 plus years, and you had that working relationship. They knew your program, they knew your company, they knew you. And since there's been this shuffling in musical chairs since COVID, those relationships are no longer there. So there's not only that lack of a personal relationship, but a lot of individuals in these roles now have a lack of industry knowledge. They may be younger, they may just be new to that role, where they're not familiar with what we may consider typical in terms of concessions or negotiations. And so this, with these contracting climate, as well as the rising costs, it's just creating a little bit more of a contentious environment and less of a we're here to partner together than maybe we saw a little bit more commonly in those pre-COVID days. Melissa, would you mind advancing to the next slide, please? So what are some ways we can look to manage these ever-rising costs? As Lisa touched on earlier, there is a desire for the increase of face-to-face meetings, but coupled with the pressure from the business to keep costs down. So as planners struggle to bridge this gap, they're looking for ways to increase their ROI, or maybe even to establish an ROI if there hasn't been one to date. One way that is newer, a little bit more trendier than it has been in the past, is looking at different types of venues. So rather than going to your typical hotel and hosting it in a ballroom, 49% of planners in North America are now looking at unique venues, compared to 17% in 2023. So that's a pretty big shift in just 2 years on a different mindset of maybe there is another alternative than the hotel we've always hosted in. Not only are planners looking at non-hotel venues in an effort to cut costs, but they're also looking to give those attendees that elevated experience where let's take them outside of the ballroom. And Lisa gave a few examples, a theater or a museum. There are so many spaces now that have opened up strictly as event spaces. I mean, look at New York City, the explosion, they have the glass, so many different options they have there that are catered to, this is a blank slate, you bring in what you want and make this event your own. At the end of the day, of course, the cheapest option will be to look at office locations. And then another, something to consider that's popping up is secondary cities. So we've even seen from the top 5 meeting destinations in 2024 to 2023, there's a few new players on the list. And that's as planners are looking more towards those second tier cities that maybe predominantly didn't host a lot of meetings. Let's try to see what is availability and rates we can get in those locations. Booking early is always going to help keep costs down. During COVID, right after COVID, we saw a lot of hesitancy with planners willing to book and commit to meetings. So 30 to 60-day turn times were very common. And the industry, obviously, you had new individuals at the hotel and racing to plan these meetings, especially for all those executive meetings that came back full force all of a sudden. 43% of planners said that location availability was their top challenge, when sourcing for 2025 programs. Now we're looking, in order to secure space and also in hopes of trying to lock in those ever increasing rates, whether that be, for airfare, food and beverage, even the room rate, we're looking at a minimum of 12 months out, even for smaller programs. And if you're looking at incentives, we have some clients that are booking 3 to even 5 years out for some of those programs. So it really is a very drastic shift from where we were even 2 years ago in terms of the timeline. And of course, as you're looking at planning earlier, that's just going to give your team more time for the negotiation process to make sure that you have everything that you need for a successful program. Leveraging supplier relationships is becoming more and more top of mind as the travel and meetings teams are combining to really create synergies between the two divisions. This does require data consolidation across the business. So this goes back to employing some sort of technology tool, so you're getting all of that rich data to be able to act on it. And synergies that can be developed between these two spaces make the most sense because you're already utilizing air, ground, hotels. And so the greater buying power you have just allows you to leverage these relationships even more. So saw a shift of this, during COVID, specifically as a lot of managers, just like on this call, became in charge of both the travel and meeting spaces. And it's definitely something that's going to continue over the next few years as data is really key now in driving so many business decisions and allowing you to get a better sense of how much are we spending with each of these suppliers and what can we kind of pull for our levers to make the most sense for our business. Next, we have negotiate. So we'll go into contracts in the next set of slides here. But of course, one biggest way to boost savings is also to make sure you're negotiating that contract and looking at, can we sign a multi-year with this same hotel? So we know for the next 2 to 3 years, we want our events taking place at this location, or maybe a multi-event contract. So if you have multiple groups, so say you have marketing and finance and HR all looking to have events, does it make sense to have them at the same hotel? And can we look at then combining our AV? So instead of having to pay for setup breakdown, the next week setup breakdown, can we do those events a little bit more back to back? So yes, we're renting out for a longer amount of time, but we're only doing one setup and one breakdown. So just different ways to come at it and looking at the organization as a whole, again, getting a better idea of where those meetings are taking place and when they're taking place to be able to do so. And of course, making sure that you cover yourself with some key critical clauses, which we'll touch on next. Lastly, being flexible. So the best way to look at the relationship you have with the venues is really to be a partnership. I know I said that's not as common now, but we are in the meetings industry and we're people, right? So we want to have that relationship. And how can I help you help me? So looking at where can you be flexible to help meet the venue where they're at? So is it looking at alternate dates for your program, maybe shifting to a less busy week or a different pattern. So instead of doing that Wednesday through Friday, maybe you'll do more of the midweek, and that would work for your group. Also interesting to take a look at is, with all of the flurry of government meetings that have been canceling, are there any opportunities there to kind of fill in and take some of that business that they just lost? I know one of the industry publications just touched on Providence, had a huge slew of cancellations that $500,000 if for just one program. So, being obviously it's last minute, but taking a look at where there are a lot of government contracts and meetings taking place over the next few months, can you kind of slide into that spot and get a good rate, and then also work with your with the venue partner to give them some business that they may have just lost out on. At the end of the day, although we're seeing somewhat of a leveling of costs over the next few years, the reality is that the cost to execute a meeting is much higher than it was 5 years ago. And it's going to require the meetings team to set that expectation, not only with the stakeholders, but also with the business, finance, procurement. And given the importance of meetings to achieving the organization's goals, so whether that be internal or customer facing, these events should be seen as an investment rather than an expense. And Lisa touched on that in her last slide, but just want to reiterate that this is definitely a shift we're seeing in the meetings industry, and looking at how is this more of an ally and a partner and working with marketing, as Cindy said, versus just an expense that all this money is, there's no ROI coming back from it. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Melissa for one last poll before we get into contracting.
Thank you, Michaela. Yes, the poll is launching, and we would like to know, what is your top contracting challenge?
Okay, so, not as spread out as our previous polls. So the top choice is supplier responsiveness at 38%. Second is cancellation penalties at 25, followed closely by attrition at 17, performance standards at 13, and then last is food and beverage minimums. So unfortunately, supplier responsiveness is something that we've been battling within the industry since COVID, our favorite word. And there is still a significant gap in there's just a labor shortage. So we're seeing this across all aspects of the meeting planning life cycle. And another reason why it is important for starting early with the planning is because we're seeing, before we could have a contract turn in 2 weeks. You'd reach out, this is what we need, boom, boom, boom. Maybe you're negotiating it, but it's a pretty quick process. And now we're seeing it takes a few weeks just for the sales reps to respond to an inquiry. Not necessarily aided by, there's such a prolific use now of the different technologies. And I was having a conversation with the rep the other day, and they don't know how much of it is, are they actually interested in my property, or am I one box they clicked on and sent out just to see, a comparison of rates? So just a quick note on that. We always recommend that if you're sourcing and you have, say, 3 key properties that you would love to seriously consider, follow it up with a phone call or an email and just say, hey, I just sent this over via insert name of tool, and just wanted to make sure that you saw that in your inbox. And we have found that that makes a significant difference in getting responses from the hotel supplier, whatever it may be, versus them just thinking it's, one of many that they may not have time to respond to. So, all right, with that, so let's hop into some contractual insights with our little bit of time we have left. So you want to focus on what makes your program a success. What are the key components that you're going to need on site in order to deliver a successful program to your stakeholders? And it's all about looking at the different levers you have to be able to get there. This may vary program to program, doesn't have to be the same. Your negotiation power is going to vary based on the venue you're at, whether it is a large chain. We all know some of them are a little bit more difficult to negotiate with than others, and a little bit more amenable to changes to the contract. Part of this is because your local sales rep at the hotel may not have the autonomy to make those changes. It may have to go through corporate legal team, and so their hands are a bit tied. Versus an independent chain or a non-hotel venue, you may have some more flexibility there to be able to get in your addendum or specific contract terms that are amenable to you. But you're looking at what is a high value to you, but low cost to the hotel. And on the flip side, what is a high value to the hotel, but low cost to you? And identify those going into the negotiation process to be able to determine get what you need out of it, whether that is more meeting space or a lowered food and beverage minimum. Maybe you have a multi-event opportunity where you can combine food and beverage minimum. Like I said, if you were, if it worked out and you could do multiple organizations or business units programs back to back, can we do a combined food and beverage spend across all of these programs instead of just for, HR or marketing? So just to keep in mind when you're going into something, you need to know what your value proposition is and really lead with that when you're having these conversations with the hotel. On the next slide, we just have outlined some key clauses for you to keep in mind. Anytime you're working with a hotel, these should be included. Some are easier than others. I'm just going to run through them somewhat quickly, but if you have any questions, please feel free to add them in the chat and I'd be more than happy to elaborate. The first one, cancellation by either party. We saw during COVID, a lot of hotels were removing the by either party and just having it single-sided. This absolutely needs to be mutual. In the event that the hotel cancels, again, we saw they were canceling because a more profitable group came along and they wanted that piece of business instead. You need to make sure it's very clearly specified what compensation your group would receive in this event. And similarly, what then are the additional concessions that you would be receiving to enhance the attendee experience or reduce budget for when that program then is rebooked at a later date, whatever it may be. The next one is attrition, which we will dive into in the next slide. Rebook, it was very common to push this to only 3 to 6 months. Given how long it is to plan meetings, the lack of responsiveness of suppliers, you really want to have at least a 12-month rebook clause in your contract. And so what that means is if you think of it as a postponement, right? So you're not canceling, but you can't have those dates anymore. The program needs to be moved. It'll allow you to rebook that same program at those same rates, whatever it may be, at a later date. Resell. So if you do end up canceling, this requires the hotel to make every effort to resell the meeting space, sleeping rooms, whatever you have contracted, to reduce the obligation you have to the hotel venue, whatever it may be. Frustration of purpose is something that's become very common post-COVID. It is not force majeure, but we have seen our clients have greater success in calling a cancellation due to frustration of purpose versus force majeure. So very clearly, you have to state what the purpose of that meeting is. Interestingly, with all of these government meetings canceling, this has come up again. So it's like a deja vu of COVID. Well, if the purpose of the meeting was to meet to discuss XYZ and we no longer able to do so, then it allows you to get out of the contract without paying those high cancellation fees. And then the last few ones, we have no construction or renovation. So when your group's in-house, it needs to be quiet. No competitors, performance clauses, again, popular while we're seeing significant staffing shortages, allows your group to make sure that you are staffed appropriately at key times. So whether that be check-in and check-out, meal times, any receptions, that you have the staff that's necessary to have a successful event for your attendees. Another thing to note is any outlets that were open during the time of the contract signing need to be open over your event dates. Again, this goes back to not having appropriate staff, whether it be the lobby bar or the hotel, restaurant, spas. All of those things need to be included in the performance clause. And then lastly, we are seeing hotels get a little bit creative, not including the exact space that would be given to the group over the dates. It's really important that you have, we are going to be in section AB of X ballroom from this time to this time, and have it written. And if the hotel needs to make a change, they notify you in writing, and you need to give approval of that change in writing as well. So just want to make sure you're covered and another group doesn't come in and they push you to a smaller option, then no, it'll work. But this is just going to be, your meal room's going to be here instead, and attendees are going to have to go up and down stairs in order to get here. So just make sure you're covered and you're getting the exact rooms that you wanted at the signing of contract. Next slide, please. So attrition considerations to keep in mind. As we're seeing a return to in-person meetings, attritions clauses have really become top of mind again. Just some notes, make sure that you are pushing for cumulative attrition versus nightly. Cumulative used to be the norm. Now we're seeing in a lot of hotel contracts, they're pushing nightly to try to get, really as much revenue out of you as possible. It's a business, it's their job. Make sure in your contract that you include language that credits your group for rooms that are held by your attendees, regardless of how they were sold. So usually hotels will not give you credit if I called and booked with the hotel directly instead of going through your room block or through your link. A lot of times hotels will say, well, it wasn't part of your group because they booked on their own. Make sure that you're getting credit for them as well. Be conservative with your initial block. So usually we would say, okay, we have 100 attendees, let's get 100 rooms. Now it may make more sense to secure a smaller block with the option to add rooms later, maybe at a higher rate, versus risking those high attrition clauses because there's going to be slippage. And unfortunately, it's even more so now as people return to face-to-face meetings. And build in review dates throughout the timeline. So you're taking a look at where you're tracking with your attendee registration, how many rooms you have on hold, and are there times that you can release those at no charge to you or penalty, and the hotel has more time to resell those and recoup that money. If at the end of the day you do incur attrition fees, request a hotel occupancy report to make sure that you were billed the correct number of rooms and that the hotel was not in a sold out situation and they're trying to double dip and get attrition fees from you as well. Audits are conducted at no charge to the group, and you can always request an audit if you find yourself in attrition. All right, and we have the last, contracting and some trends here from an agency level. So we thought it was interesting, and it was interesting at the start of the call. One of the answers for current issues is managing the outsourced program versus an in-house meeting team. And we're seeing this with a lot of our clients as well. As companies are looking to be more flexible with their meeting planning agency, we're seeing quite a shift in operating models. So rather that from the dedicated model approach, we're now seeing a lot more rate cards being pulled in instead. And even the pricing models have also been overhauled. So allowing companies to bring in the support when they need it as the volume fluctuates. And when they have those slower times, then it's just that in-house team instead of paying for agency salaries as well. So in terms of the pricing models, the percentage model was still out there. It is still out there, but we are seeing many, many companies move away from the percentage model when it comes to paying for these programs that agencies are supporting and switching to a per meeting model, not even a per person model, a per meeting model. And this is allowing companies to have more transparency regarding the budget at the outset of the planning process, especially if it is a stakeholder in the company who may not be as aware of meetings and meeting costs, all the different components. They know going into it, okay, this is what I'm going to be spending on this program, and I can budget appropriately throughout the process. Another way to increase flexibility is to break out the pricing for each phase of the meeting life cycle. So you would have sourcing and contracting in one bucket, planning in one bucket, attendee management in one bucket. And it allows your team to be able to determine what portions do we really need support for. Do we just need someone to come in to help us with registration, but we can handle the rest? Or it would be great if we can leverage the agency's knowledge and relationships with the sourcing and contracting, but then we can handle the planning from there. So looking at the strengths of your organization and current workloads to determine what makes the most sense for your overall budget. When you are going to bid out for a new agency, there has been some things that have changed over the past few years. We're seeing a few more, especially the megas, now charging for commission collection versus before that was a complimentary service and those fees were passed back to the company. This can be anywhere from 10 to 15%. So a pretty big fee. We're seeing either companies negotiating this and waiving that fee, or just moving away from the commission model in general and just choosing those lower rates at the hotel direct instead of dealing with an additional step. Lastly, since data is so crucial in driving SMM programs, agencies really need to be providing a basic level of reporting and analytical insight as part of their partnership, which extend beyond the typical QBRs. So when you're going out for your next RFP, these are just some things to keep in mind and make sure it's included in your contract to help bring back money to your program, but also to help move your program, your strategic program, moving forward and understanding all of the different components and how you can work as partners with your agency and continue to grow. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Cindy for our recap and then open up for any questions.
Great. Thanks, Michaela. Thank you, everyone, again. Some key takeaways from today's webinar is, you heard the supplier responsiveness. Even though it's improved, we still have challenges in the industry, especially on the supplier side, really critical to continue that recruitment for industry talent and look for new talent to enter the industry. We absolutely welcome that, considering the longevity of the individuals in the industry today. New perspectives are always welcome. Small meetings, they continue to increase. As Lisa said, well over 50%. We're seeing with some companies, 70, 80% of their total meetings are small meetings. If you do not have a small meetings tool, we highly recommend that you take a look at a tool in the market that would best meet your needs. And to ensure you have a small meeting strategy and you have standard operating processes and procedures for your small meetings. And again, we think they're going to increase with everyone, still working virtual for the most part, although we are seeing a shift with a lot of employees mandated to come back into the office. Again, understand your attendee demographics. I mean, they are across the board from, 20s upwards to 60s, low 70s at those meetings. And everybody has a different way of learning. So ensure that you take into consideration the demographics of your attendees. Take advantage of AI to enhance effectiveness. From 2024 into 2025 and even moving forward, we're seeing an increase of usage of AI, as was mentioned, to write communications, emails, promote the meetings, help you with venue selection. There's a lot of different ways you can use AI. Doesn't mean you don't want to lose the personal touch. The combination just helps you be more effective. Flexibility with venue location choices. Michaela mentioned flexibility is key. Look at new locations outside maybe city limits. She mentioned Providence, areas where government has held a lot of meetings that no longer may take place in those destinations. Take advantage of those cancellations for your particular group. And, again, look at new places, look at new dates, back-to-back meetings within your organization. And then focus on your contract clauses. A lot of different contract clauses out there. Make sure you cover off on each one of those. And yes, you're not going to do a win-win on every one of them, but to include them, have the discussion, you're going to make some progress, which will only benefit you at the very end. And then, as Michaela just mentioned, data is key. So important, all the way from your agency level, management level, all the way through attendee engagement. A lot of companies out there are starting to really focus on meetings data. It was always been a gap in our industry, and you're seeing more and more invest in meetings data and bring it forward, whether it's small meeting tools, larger meeting tools, companies that, manage hotel programs and other technologies that are out there that are third parties. Take a look at the market, a lot of new data opportunities for you to really manage your program overall, especially in the world of strategic meetings management. So with that, those are a few key takeaways from today's program. I think we're at our time, so I would just encourage anybody to add any other questions either into the chat or the Q&A, and we can always get back with everyone with those responses, and we'll also send all the attendees a copy of the deck. So thank you all for joining. Lisa, Michaela, thank you very much. Melissa, and everyone have a good rest of your day.